John Joseph Gotti Jr., commonly known as John Gotti, was an American mafia leader who headed the Gambino crime family in New York City. He orchestrated the murder of Paul Castellano, the previous Gambino boss, in December 1985 and assumed control of the family shortly thereafter, leading what was considered the most influential crime syndicate in the United States. This video chronicles the tumultuous journey of John Joseph Gotti Jr., from his humble beginnings in poverty to his rise as the feared leader of the Gambino crime family in New York City. Follow Gotti's ascent within the ranks of organized crime, his strategic moves to consolidate power, and the pivotal moments that cemented his reputation as the Dapper Don. Early life. John Gotti entered the world in the Bronx borough of New York City on October 27, 1940, as the fifth child among 13 siblings, with 2 tragically dying at birth. His parents, John Joseph Gotti Sr. and Philomena Fanny DeCarlo, hailed from New York City, though it's believed their roots trace back to San Giuseppe Vesuviano in Naples, Italy, where they once resided. Gotti was part of a notorious lineage, with 4 brothers also becoming made men in the Gambino crime family. Eugene Gene Gotti gained initiation before John due to John's prior incarceration. Peter Gotti was initiated under John's leadership in 1988, and Richard Fee Gotti rose to the status of caporegime, that is a captain, by 2002. Vincent, the 5th brother, was initiated in 2002. Growing up in East New York, Brooklyn, Gotti experienced the hardships of poverty alongside his siblings. His father struggled to provide, working sporadically as a day laborer, leading Gotti to harbor resentment toward him for his inability to support the family. Gotti's academic career was marked by truancy and bullying, culminating in his departure from Franklin K. Lane High School at 16. From the age of 12, Gotti was immersed in street gangs affiliated with New York City's Mafia. A mishap during an attempted theft at 14 left him with a permanent limp, having been injured by a falling cement mixer. Subsequently, he threw himself into the underworld, aligning with the Fulton Rockaway Boys gang, where he formed relationships with future Gambino mobsters, Angelo Ruggiero and Wilfred Willie Boy Johnson. In 1958, Gotti met his future wife, Victoria DiGiorgio, at a local bar. They married on March 6, 1962, despite FBI records indicating DiGiorgio's prior marriage and 1 child from that union. The couple welcomed 5 children: Angela, Victoria, John Jr., Frank, who tragically passed away in 1980, and Peter. Attempting legitimate work in 1962 as a presser in a coat factory and later as an assistant truck driver, Gotti struggled to remain on the right side of the law. By 1966, he had already been incarcerated twice, unable to resist the allure of criminal enterprises. Gamibino crime family, associate. During his teenage years, Gotti began running errands for Carmine Fatico, a capo in the Gambino family, during the time it was known as the Anastasia family under Albert Anastasia's leadership. Together with his brother Gene and friend Ruggiero, Gotti participated in truck hijackings at Idlewild Airport, now known as John F. Kennedy International Airport. It was during this period that Gotti earned the nicknames Black John and Crazy Horse, and formed relationships with fellow mob hijacker Joseph Massino, who would later become the boss of the Bonanno family. Gotti's association with Gambino underboss Aniello Neal Della Croce solidified during this time. In February 1968, Gotti was arrested by the FBI for his involvement in a hijacking where United Airlines employees identified him as the individual who had signed for stolen goods. Just 2 months later, while out on bail, he was arrested again for another hijacking, this time stealing a load of cigarettes valued at $50,000 on the New Jersey Turnpike. Later that year, Gotti pleaded guilty to yet another hijacking and was sentenced to 3 years in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. Upon his release in 1972, Gotti resumed his activities with the Bergen crew under Fatico's leadership. Gotti's role expanded to managing the crew's illegal gambling operations, showcasing his effectiveness as an enforcer. Fatico, facing legal troubles, named Gotti acting capo of the Bergen crew despite his non-membership status due to the closed membership books. Gotti's close relationship with Della Croce deepened during this time, with both men sharing similar traits and habits. In 1973, Gotti was tasked with tracking down gangster James McBratney, a suspect in the kidnapping and murder of Emmanuel Gambino. Despite a botched attempt to apprehend McBratney, which resulted in his death, Gotti was arrested for his involvement. Through a plea bargain facilitated by attorney Roy Cohn, Gotti received a 4-year sentence for attempted manslaughter. Remo Franceschini, a former NYPD member specializing in organized crime, noted Gotti's charismatic leadership qualities and unwavering toughness, foreseeing his rise as a prominent figure in the Mafia. Captain. On October 15, 1976, Carlo Gambino passed away at his residence due to natural causes. Despite widespread expectations, he chose Paul Castellano as his successor over his underboss Della Croce, believing that Castellano's focus on legitimate businesses would benefit the family. Della Croce, then imprisoned for tax evasion, couldn't contest Castellano's ascension. Castellano's confirmation as the new boss, with Della Croce remaining as underboss while directly overseeing family affairs, was formalized on November 24th. However, this arrangement led to a division within the Gambino family into competing factions. In 1976, reports emerged of the Gambino family's membership books being reopened. Gotti, released from prison in July 1977 after a 2-year stint, was initiated into the family now under Castellano's leadership. Immediately, he was elevated to the position of capo, replacing Fatico at the helm of the Bergen crew. Gotti's crew, under Della Croce's guidance, became the top earners within the organization. Apart from his share of earnings from subordinates, Gotti ran his own loan sharking operation and held a no-show job as a plumbing supply salesman. There were unconfirmed allegations suggesting Gotti's involvement in financing drug deals. In December 1978, Gotti played a role in the infamous Lufthansa heist at Kennedy Airport, arranging for the getaway van's disposal, which was intended to be crushed and bailed at a Brooklyn scrapyard. However, a misstep by the van's driver, Parnell Stax Edwards, resulted in the van being parked near a fire hydrant instead. Gotti attempted to maintain a distance between his personal life and criminal activities, although his son John Jr. became associated with the mob by 1982. Tragedy struck in March 1980 when Gotti's youngest son Frank died in a mini-bike accident involving a neighbor named John Favara. Although ruled an accident, Favara faced backlash, including threats and an attack by Gotti's wife. 4 months later, Favara vanished, presumed murdered, leading to widespread speculation that Gotti ordered the hit. During his tenure as the Bergen capo, Gotti faced 2 indictments, both of which carried over into his tenure as the Gambino family boss. In September 1984, he was charged with assault and robbery following an altercation with a refrigerator mechanic named Romuald Piecyk. Additionally, in 1985, Gotti and Della Croce, along with several Bergen crew members, were indicted in a racketeering case, revealing Gotti's friend and co-defendant, Wilfred Willie Boy Johnson, as an FBI informant. Taking over the Gambino family, Gotti swiftly grew discontented with Castellano's leadership within the Gambino family, perceiving him as overly aloof and driven solely by personal gain. This sentiment was widespread among family members, including Gotti, who harbored a personal aversion towards Castellano. Castellano's lack of respect on the streets and his perceived isolation from the realities of the criminal underworld further fueled Gotti's dissatisfaction. Additionally, Gotti had financial concerns, particularly regarding disagreements with Castellano over the division of profits from truck hijackings at Kennedy Airport. There were also rumors circulating about Gotti's involvement in drug trafficking, a lucrative venture banned by Castellano. In August 1983, the arrest of Ruggiero and John Gotti for heroin distribution, based largely on recorded conversations from a bug in Ruggiero's residence, intensified tensions within the family. Castellano, adamant about his prohibition against drug dealing among made men, demanded access to the transcripts. When Ruggiero refused, Castellano threatened to demote Gotti. Castellano's legal troubles further exacerbated internal strife within the family. In 1984, he faced indictments in a RICO case linked to the criminal activities of Roy DeMeo's crew, followed by another indictment the next year for his involvement in the commission, the Mafia's governing body. Faced with the prospect of life imprisonment, Castellano designated Gotti as acting boss alongside Thomas Bellotti and Thomas Gambino in his absence. Meanwhile, Gotti began collaborating with fellow dissatisfied members of the family, including Frank DeCicco and Joseph Joe Piney Armone, as well as soldiers Sammy the Bull Gravano and Robert D.B. Di Bernardo, collectively known as the Fist, to orchestrate Castellano's downfall. Despite Castellano's perceived inaction, Gotti remained convinced that Castellano posed a threat to his life. Armone's support was instrumental, given his esteemed status within the family, dating back to its founding by Vincent Mangano, thereby lending credibility to the conspirators' cause. In Mafia tradition, the rule stipulated that the assassination of a boss required the approval of a majority within the commission. Gotti's plan to eliminate Castellano would have marked the first unsanctioned hit on a boss since the attempted assassination of Frank Costello in 1957. Aware of the risk involved in seeking support from the other four bosses who were closely tied to Castellano, Gotti sought assistance from influential figures within his generation in the Lucchese, Colombo, and Bonanno families. He refrained from involving the Genovese family, as Castellano's close relationship with Genovese's boss, Vincent the Chin Gigante, would have raised suspicions. However, Gotti could rely on Gambino consigliere Joseph N. Gallo for support. Following Della Croce's death from cancer on December 2, 1985, Castellano altered his succession plan, appointing Bellotti as underboss to Thomas Gambino as the acting boss, while planning to dismantle Gotti's crew. Enraged by this and Castellano's absence at Della Croce's wake, Gotti decided to eliminate his boss. Acting on a tip from DeCicco about a meeting at Spark Steakhouse on December 16th, Gotti seized the opportunity. Both Castellano and Bellotti were ambushed and killed by assassins under Gotti's command. Shortly after the murder, Gotti was appointed to a three-man committee to oversee the Gambino family until a new boss could be elected, alongside Gallo and DeCicco. While an internal investigation into Castellano's murder was announced, it was widely known that Gotti effectively assumed the role of boss. He was officially declared the new boss of the family during a meeting of 20 capos on January 15, 1986. DeCicco was appointed as the new underboss, while Gallo retained his position as consigliere. Crime boss. Gotti, identified as both Castellano's likely assailant and his successor, gained widespread notoriety in 1986. At the time of assuming control, the Gambino family held the status of the most formidable American mafia syndicate, boasting an annual income of $500 million. According to Gravano's account in the book Underboss, Gotti himself amassed an estimated annual income ranging from $5 million to $12 million during his tenure as boss. To shield himself from legal repercussions, Gotti prohibited family members from entering into plea bargains that implicated the organization's existence. The Teflon Don. During his trials, Gotti frequently flashed smiles and waved at television cameras, endearing himself to some members of the public. This newfound popularity had a notable consequence. When the occupation of his attacker was revealed, and amid reports of intimidation by the Gambinos, the intended witness, Piecic, opted not to testify against Gotti. This decision was influenced by Bosko the Jugo Radonjic, leader of the Westies in Hell's Kitchen. As the trial commenced in March 1986, Piecic claimed an inability to recall the identity of his assailant, leading to the case's dismissal. The New York Post encapsulated the proceedings with the headline, "I for Gotti." It later emerged that Gambino mobsters had engaged in various tactics, such as severing Piecic's brake lines, issuing threatening phone calls, and stalking him prior to the trial. On April 13, 1986, following a visit to Castellano loyalist James Fila, DeCicco fell victim to a fatal car bombing. This attack, orchestrated by Victor Amuso and Anthony Casso of the Lucchese family under the orders of Gigante and Lucchese boss Anthony Corallo, aimed to avenge Castellano and Bellotti by targeting their successors. Gotti had initially planned to join DeCicco on the fateful visit, but cancelled his plans. The bomb detonated after a soldier accompanying DeCicco was mistaken for the boss. The use of bombs, prohibited within mafia circles due to concerns about collateral damage, initially led the Gambinos to suspect the involvement of Zips. According to Sicilian mafiosi operating in the US following the bombing, Judge Eugene Nickerson, overseeing Gotti's racketeering trial, rescheduled proceedings to prevent potential jury bias stemming from the incident's publicity. Meanwhile, Giacalone moved to have Gotti's bail revoked, citing evidence of witness intimidation in the Piecic case. From behind bars, Gotti ordered the murder of Di Bernardo by Gravano. Both Di Bernardo and Ruggiero had been vying for the role of DeCicco's successor until Ruggiero accused Di Bernardo of challenging Gotti's leadership. When Ruggiero, also facing indictment, had his bail revoked due to his confrontational conduct during preliminary hearings, Gotti appointed Armone as the new underboss, frustrated by the ongoing turmoil. Jury selection for the racketeering case resumed in August 1986, with Gotti facing trial alongside his former associate Johnson, who, despite being revealed as an informant, refused to cooperate with authorities. Also standing trial were Leonard Di Maria, Tony Rampino, Nicholas Carrozzo, and John Carniglia. During this phase, the Gambino family managed to compromise the case when George Pape concealed his friendship with Radonjic and was selected as juror number 11. Through Radonjic, Pape reached out to Gravano and agreed to sell his vote on the jury for $60,000. During the trial's opening statements on September 25th, Gotti's defense attorney Bruce Cutler rejected the existence of the Gambino family and portrayed the government's case as a personal vendetta. Cutler's primary defense strategy was to undermine the credibility of Giacalone's witnesses by highlighting their criminal activities prior to cooperating with authorities. One notable defense witness was bank robber Matthew Traynor, who testified that Giacalone offered him drugs and her underwear in exchange for testimony. However, Traynor's claims were deemed implausible by Judge Nickerson post-trial, and he was later convicted of perjury. Despite Cutler's efforts and criticisms of the prosecution's handling of the case, when jury deliberations commenced, the majority leaned towards convicting Gotti. However, due to Pape's misconduct, Gotti knew from the outset of the trial that he could expect at least a hung jury. During deliberations, Pop insisted on acquittal until other jurors began to fear for their safety. Consequently, on March 13, 1987, Gotti and his co-defendants were acquitted of all charges, including loan sharking, illegal gambling, murder, and truck hijackings. 5 years later, Pape was found guilty of obstruction of justice for his role in the jury, tampering, and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Gotti's acquittal, especially in the wake of prior mafia convictions like the Mafia Commission trial, was a significant upset that enhanced his notoriety. The media dubbed him the Teflon Don, alluding to the failure of any charges to stick against him. Reorganization. While Gotti himself managed to avoid conviction, his associates weren't as fortunate. Both underboss Armon and consigliere Gallo, part of the Gambino administration, were indicted on racketeering charges in 1986 and subsequently convicted in December 1987. Additionally, Ruggiero and John Gotti faced trial for heroin-related charges beginning in June of the same year. Before their convictions, Gotti permitted Gallo to retire and elevated Gravano to his position, while designating Frank Locascio as acting underboss in case Armon was incarcerated. The Gambinos also sought to influence the jury in the heroin trial, resulting in 2 mistrials. When Ruggiero was released due to terminal illness in 1989, Gotti distanced himself, holding him responsible for the family's troubles. Gravano recounts that Gotti even contemplated killing Ruggiero and showed reluctance to attend his funeral. Starting in January 1988, Gotti, against Gravano's counsel, mandated weekly meetings with his capos at the Ravenite Social Club. This move, perceived as unnecessary and risky by some, facilitated FBI surveillance, providing evidence of Gotti's leadership. Despite the FBI's efforts to bug the club, they failed to gather incriminating recordings. In 1988, Gotti, Gigante, and Amuso attended a commission meeting, the first since the commission trial, aiming to address escalating tensions among the families. Concerns over potential conflicts prompted discussions to improve communication, with Gigante blocking Massino and the Bananos from rejoining the commission to prevent Gotti from gaining a majority. Furthermore, Gotti extended his influence to the De Cavalcante crime family in 1988, compelling boss Giovanni Rigi to align his family with the Gambinos following a display of strength at Rotondo's father's wake. On Christmas Eve 1988, Gotti's son, John Jr., was initiated into the Gambino family by Gravano to avoid accusations of nepotism. John Jr. swiftly rose to the rank of capo following his initiation. Assault acquittal. On the evening of January 23, 1989, Gotti was apprehended outside the Ravenite and accused of orchestrating the 1986 assault on labor union official John O'Connor. While in the police car, he confidently remarked, "3-1 I beat this charge." O'Connor, a prominent figure in the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America, UBC for short, Local 608, who was later convicted of racketeering himself, was suspected of ordering an attack on a restaurant associated with the Gambinos. He was subsequently shot and injured by members of the Westies gang. After spending a night in custody, Gotti was released on $100,000 bail, listing his occupation as a salesman for a plumbing contracting company. During this period, the FBI had cultivated new informants and discovered that part of the reason the Ravenite bug failed was because Gotti conducted sensitive conversations elsewhere, such as in a rear hallway of the club's building or in an apartment on its upper floors occupied by a friendly widow of a Gambino soldier. By November 1989, both locations had been bugged. The apartment bug proved particularly valuable as Gotti candidly discussed his role as boss during meetings there. In a conversation with Locascio on December 12th, Gotti openly admitted to ordering the murders of Di Bernardo and Liborio Milito. He also expressed his intent to eliminate soldier Luis de Bono, who had disregarded a summons to discuss his management of a drywall business he shared with Gotti and Gravano. Despite the FBI mishearing de Bono's name, he was killed on October 4th, 1990. In another taped meeting on January 4th, 1990, Gotti promoted Gravano to underboss, indicating his preference for Gravano to lead the family in case Gotti was convicted in the assault case. State prosecutors presented evidence linking Gotti to the assault case, including a recording of him discussing O'Connor and expressing his intention to harm him, along with the testimony of Westies gangster James McElroy. However, Gotti was acquitted of all 6 assault and conspiracy charges at trial on February 9, 1990. Following the trial, there were celebratory displays by locals. Jules J. Bonavolonta, director of the FBI's Organized Crime Division in New York, expressed concerns about Gotti's public image, emphasizing his role as the head of the largest Cosa Nostra family and his association with ruthless individuals. It later emerged that FBI bugs had captured Gotti discussing plans to manipulate the jury, similar to the 1986-1987 racketeering case. This revelation drew criticism from Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau and State Organized Crime Task Force Chief Ronald Goldstock, who were not informed of this information by the FBI and federal prosecutors. Morgenthau stated that had he been aware of these bugged conversations, he would have requested a mistrial. 1992 conviction. The bugs covertly placed throughout the Ravenite, including in the main room, the first-floor hallway, and the upstairs apartment, frequently captured conversations involving Gotti, Gravano, and Locascio discussing incriminating events. On December 11, 1990, FBI agents and NYPD detectives conducted a raid at the Ravenite, leading to the arrests of Gotti, Gravano, and Locascio. Federal prosecutors leveled a new racketeering case against Gotti, charging him with 5 murders, including Castellano, Bellotti, Di Bernardo, Milito, and after review of the apartment tapes, Louis de Bono, conspiracy to murder Gaetano, Corky Vastola, loan sharking, illegal gambling, obstruction of justice, bribery, and tax evasion. Bail was denied for the Gambino administration based on tapes from FBI bugs played at pre-trial hearings. Attorneys Cutler and Gerald Shargle were disqualified from defending Gotti and Gravano after being deemed part of the evidence by prosecutors. Gotti subsequently hired Albert Krieger to replace Cutler. The tapes also strained the relationship between Gotti and Gravano, with Gotti portraying his newly appointed underboss as overly greedy and attempting to shift blame for the murders of Di Bernardo, Milito, and De Bono onto Gravano. Gravano's decision to turn state's evidence on November 13, 1991, marked a significant moment, making him the highest-ranking member of a New York crime family to become an informant until Joseph Massino in 2003. Gotti and Locascio were tried in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York before District Judge Werner Leo Glasser. Jury selection began in January 1992 with an anonymous and fully sequestered jury due to Gotti's reputation for jury tampering. The prosecution commenced its case on February 12th, presenting tapes showing Gotti discussing Gambino family business and establishing his motive to kill Castellano. Gravano's testimony on March 2nd provided detailed insight into the conspiracy to assassinate Castellano and implicated Gotti in several murders. Despite efforts by the defense to discredit Gravano and present witnesses, the jury found Gotti guilty on all charges on April 2nd, 1992. On June 23, 1992, Glasser sentenced both defendants to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, along with a $250,000 fine. Incarceration. Gotti was confined at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, where he endured extensive periods of solitary confinement, typically allowed out of his cell for only 1 hour per day. Despite his appeals, the United States Supreme Court rejected his final appeal in 1994. In a notable incident on July 18, 1996, Gotti was assaulted by another inmate named Walter Johnson in the prison's recreation room, resulting in bruises and bleeding. Reports from New York's Daily News suggested that Gotti had provoked Johnson with a racial slur. Seeking retribution, Gotti offered substantial sums, ranging from $40,000 to $400,000, to members of the Aryan Brotherhood, including David Sahakian and Michael McElhiney, to have Johnson killed. McElhiney instructed 2 lower-ranking members to carry out the hit if given the opportunity, according to a federal indictment that charged him and 39 others with various crimes. However, Johnson was subsequently transferred to the Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. Despite being incarcerated and facing pressure from the commission to relinquish his leadership role, Gotti insisted on retaining his title as boss until his death or retirement, with his brother Peter and son John Jr. acting as intermediaries for issuing orders. By 1998, John Jr. was believed to be functioning as the acting boss of the family when he was indicted on racketeering charges. Against his father's wishes, John Jr. pleaded guilty and received a sentence of 6 years and 5 months imprisonment in 1999. He later asserted that he had severed ties with the Gambino family. Peter subsequently assumed the role of acting boss and is thought to have formally succeeded his brother shortly before Gotti's passing. The indictment of John Jr. placed further strain on Gotti's marriage. Victoria Gotti, previously unaware of her son's involvement in the Mafia, held her husband responsible for their son's predicament and threatened to leave him unless he allowed John Jr. to leave the criminal organization. Death and legacy. In 1998, Gotti received a diagnosis of throat cancer and was admitted to the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, where he underwent surgery. Despite the successful removal of the tumor, the cancer resurfaced 2 years later, prompting Gotti's return to Springfield, where he remained until the end of his life. Gotti's health deteriorated rapidly, and he passed away on June 10, 2002, at the age of 61. The Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn declared that Gotti's family would not be allowed to hold a Requiem Mass, but permitted a memorial Mass following the burial. A non-church venue hosted Gotti's funeral. Approximately 300 observers trailed the procession after the service, which passed by Gotti's Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, concluding at the gravesite. Gotti was laid to rest in a crypt adjacent to his son, Frank. Peter Gotti, Gotti's brother, was unable to attend due to his incarceration. The absence of representatives from other New York City crime families at the funeral appeared to signal a rejection of Gotti's leadership and legacy. Numerous prosecutions resulting from Gotti's tactics had left the Gambino family in disarray, with half of its members incarcerated by the turn of the century.